would be more like do awnings. If the building's been painted before, painting the building. If the building hasn't been painted, there may be some sealing that can be done. But essentially, the city
People sitting in front of the door.
probably enter into a maintenance agreement with the property owner. I don't think we want to actually go in and purchase facade easements and then install the improvements. I think we just want to do it under a maintenance agreement. And I think it would really improve the curb appeal of downtown. A hybrid of that is to instead of totally abandoning the trees, would be what about eliminating, and I'm curious what y'all think about this in particular, but eliminating the traffic signals at Lindsay Street. Right now the traffic on Lindsay, entering onto Lindsay from Main Street and exiting Lindsay onto Main Street is about 83 cars a day on average, according to the DOT. One thing that could be done is installing a stop, and maybe not a stop that, and ideally I think you try to avoid this, that stops traffic on Main Street and stop cars on Lindsay that are trying to turn left or right. I think what you probably do is leave the poles that are there up. Of course, we test this first. You put it into a yellow and a red blinking light, and you put temporary stop signs out there to see how it works functionally. But long term, if you ever wanted to go back to the lights, I'd leave the poles there. I'd cap the holes in the poles. Hang some flower baskets. There are a lot of examples of communities that have gone with hanging baskets. Mount the stop signs to it with a decorative bracket so we don't put another pole or hole in the sidewalk. And just take the traffic signal down and leave the circuitry in place so they can always go back. And if you did that, you'd have the ability to plant trees from essentially Robert Lake's building back to Young Life, past where we're at now. And when you look at it, the buildings in the 1300 block, which would be where Unique Fitness is, and the 1200 block where Mr. Eddie's store is, you've got multi-story buildings. The architecture of those buildings are probably a little bit more interesting. They're more ornate. You could probably get away with not having the trees there. You can do some potted topiaries. As part of the project, the awnings might be a tad more extended in terms of how far they project out from the buildings, because you're not dealing with conflicts with trees in the sidewalk.
I have a question about some issues with planting trees at all. There's not enough room as the sidewalks and the tree that exist right now to plant trees. The trees are too big. The ones you have planted over here on right in front of Boy Street there, they've already started tearing the sidewalk right there. You notice they're not cracked the sidewalk already. And they get to be 60 feet tall, 50 feet wide, which would cover the street anyway. Any light there would be blocked. But if you look at Greenville, they have similar sidewalks, but they gutted the whole thing. They have 12 to 15 feet from the building. Then the trees, we don't have that. They need to go. So we have a lot of issues with planting anything tree. It's going to get any kind of size. I'm not going to be able to do that, especially in the species.
And I'm not sure. We were trying to, I see what you mean, we were trying to plant on Boy Street the trees that were planted on Main down across from Memorial Park. They're not real noticeable, down there at Poor Richards back to Edward Jennings, because you've got those huge oaks across the street, and sometimes that's what catches your eye instead of those trees. I hadn't noticed where they busted the sidewalk. It may be a slightly different species, but you're right, that's a huge thing with consideration with trees, is planting something that will work in that environment and not push the sidewalks up and the curbs out.
I'm sure that happened in Greenville too. That was planted in 79, I think it was.
Yeah.
79. And now they've done all these street shades, it's all stamped concrete to fix all these problems they had with that.
They built the sidewalks and streets around the tree.
Around the trees, yeah.
Around the trees, around the sidewalk.
Yeah.
That's going to be a continuing issue with maintenance of the sidewalk.
Yeah.
If you redo the whole thing.
Yeah, and I tell you, the thing too, more broadly too, is with these street trees, that a lot of times the life cycle of the trees aren't when the tree dies, it's just when it outgrows that space, and you have to be committed to dealing with that. Yeah.
A lot of issues there. I'm a registered forester in South Carolina, so I understand a lot of trees.
Yeah.
These are ornamental species, so they have a little different. I looked up the alley trees.
Alley. And apparently there's a difference between those trees on Boys and the ones on Main. I think have to be, we need to research that thoroughly before we do anything with it. I guess a decision needs to be made too. Do you plant all the same species, or do you try to go with some different species that you think will work in that environment and try to create like different texture and different fall color?
It depends on what you're looking for. If you want small trees, then you can plant small trees. So if you want something that's going to, all the southern towns have that canopy, it's not going to work, especially this block up here. Down by the Opera House Community Center.
Street like more trees.
But up here, it would be in the middle of the lanes of traffic. Which you could one lane down through the middle there. But that's what they do. Some people like it, some don't.
And that was a challenge too, an issue too with DOT. That was brought up in the morning meeting. Is their initial reaction to converting Main Street to one way. It's the highway. I don't know. I should have started with this. The street is actually the property of the state. It's not the city street. In fact, we had a few examples of actual city streets, and they came back and said, "Well, you can't convert Main Street to one way."
I didn't actually talk to them, they said that was fine, they didn't have a problem with it, they even suggested if you would like to, they would allow Harrington to go the other way.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the
The
state DOT guy, I have his phone number.
Okay.
But I think what he's trying to say is, streetscaping is great, but do you really want to spend the $250,000 on lights that already are serviceable and beautiful and they work, to accommodate trees, if we're not going to do the groundwork to make sure that the tree has the best chance of surviving, or so maybe there's an alternative way, the trees as a planter, or greenery, more greenery, not so much trees, or it's not going to be a hazard to. You're not going to spend $250,000 so you have to go back in 5 years and spend another $500,000. That's an awful lot of money when people are going out of business.
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe there's an alternative way that might work a little better.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, that's got to thoroughly be researched. This concept with Lindsay Street, if that's even a possibility. I mean, again, I think if we tried it, it would need to be tested. Could be a way of putting the trees out, but then also avoiding the $250,000 expenditure, and then looking at repurposing that money. And I think one of the concepts of repurposing it would be the facade improvements. So, I mean, that's an idea.
Can we see about getting with some of that money some more lighting up and down Main Street? It is so dark, particularly down this area. It's got to be lighted up some.
Well, you know what, and I think we could definitely do the additional lamps. One of the ideas with the trees, and I know if we didn't do trees all the way down into the 1,200 blocks, it wouldn't address any issues there, but was to put the low voltage lighting in the planting pits, actually more in the electrical end. And the added benefit would be you can put the vent hookups, the power hookups in there, and you've got the locks on them, and then you can have the duplexes opened up for events where you can power. But it would also provide the power that we need for the low voltage lights, and those would shine up into the trees. And from a maintenance standpoint, of course, I think lights in trees look great, but when they grow, sometimes it becomes an issue, and the lights at the base, are low maintenance. So that's kind of the idea.
You're
And
talking
that would
about
create a little
lamps,
more
aren't
light.
you?
Yeah, I'm just talking
light poles.
light poles,
Yeah,
something to
they're so
lighten
dark.
up.
Well, I think where I was getting at is the combination of some additional light poles plus the lighting into the trees is going to create more ambient light. It may get kind of what you're.
Because the older people make comments, they will not walk up and down Main Street at night because they don't feel safe.
Okay.
Yeah, the last festival you had, everybody was in the dark.
Yeah.
Couldn't hardly see nothing.
I think the biggest thing with the trees, it's a few of us was probably here 20 years ago when we had trees
We
then.
had trees.
And the biggest thing is then, they were nice when they were smaller. Then they got bigger. Then you have birds roosting in them with bird crap all over the place. And then they got so big you couldn't even see the fronts of the stores. And you rode down Main Street. That's all you saw. You didn't see the front of the stores. That's all you saw were trees. So, and then 20 years ago you had these beautiful trees. Well, they didn't work, so they cut them down.
Well, I tell you what, if you would, I mean, and I see where you're going with this. Look at the trees down in the 1,000 block across from Memorial Park and tell me what you think. I think if a tree like that was used, you wouldn't have the issue with it obscuring the businesses or the signs. And I think the growth pattern is something that'll work pretty. I mean, they'll eventually get too large, and I mean, you'll have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that could work.
But I think